Today, let's go into a bit of history about my dad and how he came to be a champion of earth replenishment, with an example in his life. To go back to his early days, my father was born in a family which was called the Vaidyan family. It is a family with a lot of history of the oldest doctors in Kerala, and they were Ayurvedic doctors, and the earliest ancestors, which dated back to maybe around 100 or 200 years back and more, were all Ayurvedic doctors. And much before that, they were also, if you go into the family history, they were Nambutiris, they were into knowledge, learning. And that was the tradition of their early ancestors. So my father was born into a Vaidyan family. But during the time, it was the British time, and although they had lands to cultivate and sow, the entire South India was in a regime of British management, which means that there was a war going on during that time, and most of the cultivation of all of the people, nearly 60 to 70% had to be given to the managing British system, So although they cultivated, they didn't have enough for their family, because most of the lands, the cultivation went to the British in terms of the war which was going on to that time, and the feeding of the soldiers, which was done in turn by confiscating the yields of rice cultivation, all kinds of agriculturation across India. So although we had the early family had a lot of lands, much of the cultivation had to be given to the British. So they led a life which was not very, rich. It was not also middle class, because most of the people around the time, although they had properties, although they had land, in terms of food and lifestyle, they lived very, very modest lives, So there were times when the war got into such a extent that much of their yields could not be taken by the family, so they had to live on the plantations other than rice. So they lived on also jackfruits and also the leaves of the jackfruit trees. They made soups out of it, and they usually, that was the kind of lifestyle, which means that they led a kind of balanced lifestyle, and which was not very rich, which was not extremely poor, but they could just manage, And some of the instances which he told me was they had to walk through big cultivation fields, which were managed by the supervisors of the British, which was rice and paddy fields. They had to walk through it, and they used to walk 3 to 4 kilometers and then reach the school, and the school teacher was very strict. They had to be on time. So although they left, they used to leave their home around 1 or 2 hours and then walk for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and then reach the school. And the teachers were so strict that they had to be on time, And if they did not come on time, they'll have to walk back all the way. So they had to get up early in the morning around 4 o'clock and then start walking to school as per what they said. And by around 7 o'clock, they used to reach school, after their morning activities and breakfast and everything, So that was the kind of lifestyle when they got up, from the childhood. And then over a period of time, when he reached high school and graduated from high school, the time was so, the cultivation there was so scarce because they could not manage. And most of their properties were managed by the British, and whatever they got was very meager. So my father's dad told him to go and search for a job in the most closest cities. It can be either Andhra Pradesh, Visakhapatnam, Hyderabad, or Madras, or Bangalore. And then my father he liked Bangalore. Somehow he got good information about Bangalore and the opportunities there. So then the family of my father, gathered some money, the very modest money they could, and they gave him around 100 rupees during that time. The 100 rupees during that time, it might be equal to around 10,000 rupees today, no? But it still had value. So they collected that 100 rupees and gave it to him, and then he boarded a train by himself at around 18 years, and then he went to Bangalore. And then the family had some contacts there, so there was a person who was in the army. And my father's father contacted him and told him to try to get into the army. He tried to get into the army, but because of his height, he lacked 1 inch. So they told him, no, try and do some exercise and come get one extra inch, and then you can come into army. So then he tried a lot to get into the army, but he could not. Then he exhausted most of his money, the 100 rupees which he had, in around a month's time. And then he was walking around the streets without money for some time, And there was a relative whom he was staying with, but he did not want to disturb them because they themselves were finding it tough, So he moved out of their place. Then he didn't have a place to stay also, So for around nearly a week, he just ate for around 2 or 3 times a day, 2 or 3 times in a week, So by the end of the week, he was so exhausted. And he didn't want to go back to Kerala also, because he came with a purpose to get a job in the army, and then he could not. And then he did not want to disturb the family which he was staying in. So he moved out, and then he was walking the streets without money, exhausted. Then at one point of time, he told us in a story that he went to a restaurant very close to BL, a small restaurant, a vegetarian restaurant. There he was standing there and watching people eating. And one particular gentleman noticed the hunger in his eyes and also the clear purpose in his eyes, and a very motivated and truthful individual, They noticed my father as a very motivated and truthful individual, and he called him and gave him also food, told him that I will give you all the food for this time, you eat. And then they paid, and my father still remembered him, even after 30 to 40 years, that person, And he wanted to locate the person and give him something, but somehow he couldn't find his address. But he blessed him with all his heart, because that person noticed the real situation of my dad and also the innocence in what he was planning to do and his purpose. And then he slowly tried different places, and then one of his relatives, somehow called him and said there is one Parsi gentleman very close to Vaidyan, in the place in Bangalore, and he owns a lot of lands, and they own oil fields, They make oil, castor oil, that's what they were doing in their farm. So they needed someone to supervise and maintain the records. And so since my dad was educated, it was it was not normal during those times to find really educated people, to look after the accounts, and mostly someone who can be trustable was very, very meager. So my father went and applied, and then he got the job in the Parsi gentleman's castor oil factory plus dairy farm, At first he was looking after the castor oil, and they were very happy, but over a period of time they told him to look after the dairy itself. They bought some cows and so, and the castor oil was given to another department to manage, and my father was in charge of the dairy farm of around 30 to 50 cows. They were all good breed Holstein cows according to what he said, and he was in charge of getting up early in the morning at around 4:30, and then getting all the cows milked, and then getting all the accounts right, and then sending the milk, and then seeing that the milk is marketed, and then giving back the amount to the Parsi manager, the gentleman. And he managed it so well, and he was totally dedicated. He got up early in the morning, 3:30, and then got his job done, and then his salary was 30 rupees per month during the time. The 30 rupees might be equal to maybe 3,000 rupees today, but he could eat something also from there. He got one-time meal, and then I think he got 3 times meal, and then he had 30 rupees also, which means that he had the 30 rupees mostly as pocket money, and then he could send some money to Kerala also, to his family. And during the time there was a World War II going on also, and this is something which my father took up in clear initiative, and he managed it so well, and the pastors gentlemen were so happy with him that they told him that they would not find any other person like him, who was so dedicated in all of their time when they were employed people. They have not have found a person as dedicated, as loyal, as well managed and well bred, and also punctual in all sense of life. And they kind of also awarded him, much more response within the estate. He was in charge of the entire estate of around 30 to 40 acres, and now also they gave him in charge of much of the lands they owned during that time. That was the entire Vidyanapura which you see today, which is around, they owned around nearly 1,000 acres of land, nearly 1,000 acres of land during that time. And they told him that you will have to put people to manage. But my father said, this is not my thing, I cannot manage such big land. I will manage the dairy farm. And gradually over a period of time, the Parsi gentlemen thought that they'll have to move into managing their Lawas lands, and they did not regard the dairy of much interest to them, because the revenue which they were getting from other sources was much better. So they also had a mango garden, so they told that they decided that they will maintain it as mango gardens and manage it once a year. Mango gardens did not need much management, so they awarded my father all kinds of support for his future life, and they told him that you can find better prospects, you are a very efficient gentleman, and you have to move about and find better prospects for yourself. And they gave him all the support and all the foundation, and the Parsi gentleman was a constant friend in his life, and the Parsi gentleman said, I'm for your support, you have been helpful to me, you have been my base, you have been my foundation. Any time you have any problem, you come back to me. And his name was Dinshaw. And so with that kind of blessing from the Parsi gentleman, my father went. And then he got into, he knew that he wanted to learn about construction. So he also had some kind of information about construction. He started working with the Air Force as a supervisor and watching the constructions happening. And then he learned within a period of 1 year, he learned everything about construction, right from the foundation to building the best and strongest of buildings, And then they were very happy with the way he supervised things and got the construction done. And also during the time, my father got a lot of experience in construction. He got to know everything about construction, right from the initiation phase to the final phase of construction of the smallest and the tallest buildings and the strongest buildings and the buildings of all shapes and sizes. And then he thought he should start his own contractor, as well as private builders, And he started building different buildings for people, across Bangalore city. And some of his first construction was the Bethany Convent, which is still going very well now. It's a very good, strong building, and this building still exists now. And many prominent buildings in Bangalore was built by him. And also during the time, he got an idea that he has to form a layout on his own, and then he started the Kalathur layout. It was a land which was completely unused. It was a forested land, completely uninhabited, completely forested, with all kinds of plants growing, which was completely unmanaged. He kind of leveled it and made it into a layout, and then had a very clear system of management to run the layout, And then he also started selling sites at very, very modest prices. His purpose was to sell the sites not for profit alone, but as a sense of purpose. So he called people who did not have the money also, They were very moderate people who were just working in HMTBL, they used to get a moderate salary, and they told them, you just give me just maybe 10% of your salary every month, you take a site for yourself. And just on small installments, he gave sites to people, and most of the other people, and his close friends and also people who knew about it, told him that you are not in your right sense to give people sites on installments. You take the full cash and then only you give the sites. But he said, no, I have a purpose before profit. So he called people and then on small installments started giving them sites. And most of the people who bought sites from them also are very happy as of now, because although it was a very small investment initially, it got great returns over a period of time, over a period of 10, 20, 30 years, 50, 40 years, It's brought enormous returns for the small investments they made. Not everyone bought an installment. Many of them also paid fully and also bought. But the basic purpose of my dad was not to make money, but was to serve people with a purpose, to help and enable people to get sites, to get a house, to maintain a family, and then get into an organized society, And with that purpose, he started to go ahead in life because he put purpose before profit first. And then God willing and with God's vision, he got to know a manager of a bank, and he said, since you are dedicated, I've seen how you are serving people, you must buy some agricultural land and I will help you to take a loan on it, And with his help, he got a loan and bought agricultural lands. But then also his life had a lot of loans, And during this time he got married to my mother, and they had a good life. She was working in Arabia as a nurse in one of the prominent American oil companies, and in one of the hospitals as a nurse. And then when she came here, she saw my dad and got married. And then they had a car, they bought a car. It was like an egg-shaped car, It's a very old ambassador car. And that car was one of the first possessions which were kind of admired by most people who saw it, And during the time, in the area, it was very little people who drove a car. Most people were on bikes and so, And to get a good car was very scarce, And wherever he drove the car, it made a lot of sound, it made a lot of noise, but still it was a kind of prestige, People looked up to it, the egg-shaped car. And he also had a telephone during the time, which was also rare, and it was a small fixed line telephone with a large wiring system, He got the wiring to his house, and that wiring could be seen by 1 kilometer, all kinds of wires, so that the telephone line could be connected. And during the time, there was no direct talk between people. It was a trunk call. So if you wanted to talk to people, you could talk to people on a local scale who had that same wired connection, because that was the only, and that wired connection was very rare. So suppose it was out of Bangalore, you had to wait for a trunk call, which would used to take 15 minutes, which used to take 30 minutes, which used to take even half a day, for them to call back. So that was the system of telephone. And then there were a lot of loans, which my father took to maintain, and there were people coming to the house, to take back the loans. Although my father had the assets, the land assets, it could not be sold immediately, so the interest had to be paid. So the loan people, the loan sharks used to come. And that's the time when we also were born, kind of, and we used to see people coming. And then I had an idea to get a Alsatian dog. And that Alsatian dog used to keep the loans people away from some time, if they're disturbing us. Gradually, through our trust in the Lord, trust in the God of creation, All of the loans were kind of cleared, over a period of time. My dad also started to do things in a more prosperous way, But the mission of his life was to help people. His mission was to serve people first. He started to buy and develop the lands that he had bought, and also buy additional lands and then give it away as sites. But the purpose of his mission was not to make money. It was to serve people. The title of Vaidyan was given to the early ancestor of the family. What I mean is the latest ancestor, which is around 200 years back, was one Mr. Dr. Luke, from the family. So the Dr. Luke was a part of the family, and around 100 years before him, the family converted to Christianity, and he was titled, his new name was Dr. Luke, but he was very much well versed with Ayurveda, and he was one of the greatest physicians of Ayurveda during the time, and especially to do with eye treatments, Why I say that he was one of the greatest Ayurvedic physicians of the time, and also one of the greatest physicians of the time, of the world, was people from across the world, well-known, educated people, royalty from across the world used to seek his advice for eye treatments, because he was the only person in the world with unique eye treatments which could cure the most grave eye problems in people, and especially the royal families. He was brought to the king's palace, and he treated the prevailing king, Varma's family member. He treated the royal king's family members, and especially one particular child who had a grave eye problem, and was able to cure him fully. Seeing his prowess in the eye treatments, and also being sought after from across the world for his eye treatments, the king of the time named him with the title Vaidyan, which means the doctor of the kingdom, the doctor of the royal families. He was also the doctor of the world and the king of the time, which ruled much of the southern parts of India and across. Named him Vaidyan, and the family title still holds even today. There are different generations of the Vaidyan family, and there are very well-known people in the Vaidyan family across the world in very high positions, but they still remember the forefather who gave the title, the name Vaidyan, to the Vaidyan family. Locus Vaidyan will be ever remembered as the greatest physician of his time, serving the common people, serving every kind of person who sought treatment for their eye problems and ailments through the system of Ayurveda. He proceeded with purpose before profit. He was dedicated to his cause. He wanted to excel in his cause and give the best treatments to people, and thereby he was also recognized by the king, and also being sought after from the world over through the royal families and most important people who wanted his treatment, because he was the only person to offer the cure where no one else in the world could offer the cure. And thereby the title of the Vaidyan family still holds even today, even after 200 or 250 years, with numerous members of the family, of the children, of the greater grandchildren, being top level managers, decision makers in some of the top companies of the world, in some of the most important places And the Vaidyan family still holds its status. The Vaidyan family is completely and totally recognizes the contribution of Locos Vaidyan, the greatest physician of the time, in tune with the energies of the earth to serve the fellow men and putting purpose before profit, thereby contributing to the replenishment of our earth right at his time 250 years ago, and his vision and his contribution still holds today. Let's replenish our earth.